Welcome to episode 126 of Closer Mentality. I'm your host, Julia Mellett. Today, we welcome a guest uniquely positioned at the intersection of sport and neuroscience, and his perspective on the impact of competition on the brain is fascinating. Without further ado, meet Nate Roy. Roy's first experience with competitive athletics, football, set in motion a life lived discovering the sides of sport that casual fans never get to see.
That it has indeed always been football. So I grew up in the state of Alabama where football is really everything. And I also have four brothers. So as you could probably imagine, we grew up competing in the backyard every summer. It was like what we were most excited for was to get our gear together for the fall season. And my whole life, that's what I saw as like my primary goal was particularly to play football in college. And I would say that even now, where I'm at a point where my identity is maybe shifted a little bit to encompass other things, that it's still almost like that same drive is there. Now I see myself in a role of where I can kind of help the next generation in their path because I see people who see the sport the same way that I always have. But I think that's largely the base upon which everything I do is built, is that football path.
Roy ended up playing football for Oberlin College, a three-sport athlete in Clinton, Pennsylvania. Roy credits his background in track and powerlifting for his determination on the gridiron. His opportunity to play at Oberlin is one he discounted in hindsight. A small school, an opportunity upon which he imposed his own limitations. He kept thinking he could have done more. That mindset spurred on an interest in motivation, and more broadly, sports psychology.
I've had some amount of imposter syndrome where I did maybe have the external accolades in high school, such as being all conference and things like that. But at the same time, I played at a small school and I was maybe a little bit undersized to play in college myself. I ended up having a late growth spurt that kind of changed that. But at the time, I saw a lot of limitations. And I don't think I really had the ability at the time to see through those things and realize that no, maybe I have limitations as everyone does, but I also have a lot going for me that can help me accomplish this goal. So I always knew it was what I wanted to do. And I always said that everybody who knew me knew that that's what I really wanted more than anything. But I think at the time I would have been not so confident in saying that that would indeed happen. And I was lucky enough to have a few great mentors. My dad is definitely one of them, as well as certain coaches who did see that potential in me. And I would say at the time, I kind of anchored to that and thought, if they think I'm good enough, then maybe I'm good enough. But in terms of realizing it as a realistic achievement that was going to happen, to be quite honest, I don't think I realized that until I was there and I was living it.
Roy credits the process of restructuring his mindset as a precursor for his even more broad interest in neuroscience. He saw firsthand how humans can rewire their brains and sought to tie sports psychology into his research.
It's not something that you can watch mindset videos on or have one off season of really diligent work and all of a sudden you believe in yourself. I think it takes a lot of iteration, a lot of unpacking of the specifics for what might be holding you back or might be driving that feeling that you're an imposter. And I also think it takes consistency because there have been, I would say I made strides in that category probably late in college where I got to where I was pretty confident in who I was and what I brought to the table as an athlete and otherwise. But even in the time since making that progress, sometimes you get hit with things that kind of shake up your foundation. So I think it's something we talk about this a lot with physical prep, but I think with mental prep, it's the same. You can't get complacent. You can build up your self-concept, your identity, but it's always getting hit by things from your environment. So you have to continue to reinforce it in order to keep it robust and unshakable to the adversity of life.
After assessing his interests and the potential trajectory of his career outside of football, Roy opted to transfer from Oberlin to Cornell University. At an Ivy, he could still play football while working directly in labs and furthering his professional interests. If an Ivy League program believed in him, that would be enough, right? For Roy, not exactly.
So this story kind of goes further back because in high school, I always felt like, and it was very naive, like looking back, but I always felt like, I need to find my people. And I think a lot of people kind of have this mindset. And at the time, to me, that meant like I love to learn and I have kind of this vision for what I want to build and put out there into the world. And at the time, it was just like I was vaguely aware of like Ivy League universities and what this was, supposed to mean. So I was like, I'm going there. That's where I'll find people like me, like people who love to learn, people who are interested in kind of changing the world for the better in the manner that I am. And so that was my goal. It was like my highest goal. And again, looking back, I'm like, that's kind of ridiculous. Yeah, these are good schools, I guess, and maybe good places to compete in sports, but to some extent, they're also just random universities. Like you can find your people anywhere, is what I believe now. And really, you have to, I mean, kind of going on a tangent at this point, but you have to put that energy out there to find your people. It doesn't matter where you're rooted. But at the time, that's where it's going to be. That's where I'm going to find it. So that was my goal, was to get recruited to play at an Ivy League university for football. And as I was saying, I played at a very small high school. I was undersized myself. So I was in contact with some coaches from schools in the Ivy League, but ultimately did not get the offer to go and play. So I went to Oberlin with that kind of on the back burner. I wouldn't say I went there thinking I'm going to transfer, but I still had that idea in mind that that's what I originally wanted. And I think for a while I forgot about that. I really was happy at Oberlin. There was a lot of opportunity there. And then COVID happened. And all of a sudden I was sent back home. And I think something about being home, it kind of probably places your mindset back where it was when you were previously there. And so I said, it's time to give this a shot again. And ultimately put in an application and reached out to the coaches at Cornell who I'd been in contact with previously. And I guess in some ways it was a happy ending, but also not so happy of an ending. Because I did get that opportunity to go and I guess live out this dream or this goal that I had. But at the same time I got there, and honestly, the realization was, this isn't a fix all for this problem or this goal that I have of finding my people and building out my vision. So I would say that process of not being able to have that opportunity and then all of a sudden having it, but maybe it wasn't quite what I pictured. It did a lot just to kind of reframe my perception of who I was and where I was going then in the time following. I recall showing up to like run the 40-yard dash and other things that we get tested in football, and just feeling like I underperformed. And to me at the time, it just didn't make sense. I was like, well, I outworked everyone, at least the way I saw it, I did, and I'm stronger than pretty much everyone, but I'm losing these battles, whether it was speed or things more reaction time oriented. Of course, there's a psychological side of a sport like football, and it led me to the realization, okay, well, there's the muscles that are very important, but there's something that controls the muscles. And I think that was the roots of my interest in neuroscience, is what can we do to enhance what underlies the muscles and what they do in sports. But at the same time, that was I started like watching YouTube videos and kind of experimenting with different training techniques. for the nervous system and the brain, like in my garage gym. But that's not, real neuroscience, maybe garage gym neuroscience, if you will. But then eventually I got to a place where I had the resources and the mentors available to like do, I guess, what you would call real neuroscience. So I recall getting to Cornell, and I knew I had this interest basically to understand the brain to a greater degree. And I reached out to a professor there who I ended up working with and had the opportunity to study patterns in functional neuroimaging data in the aftermath of concussions. And of course, I had, even at the time, had a lot of experience kind of seeing this, I guess, the physical effects of concussion manifesting in those around me. So this had a lot of meaning to me. And I think that's what drove the passion, the interest to continue to develop. Is on the one hand, it was very academic, but on the other hand, it was very personal. It was like, I do see, even if it's somewhat detached, as things are typically in research, I had a clear vision of the path from that work ultimately being translated into something that really mattered to people's everyday lives.
Roy's interest, cultivated by experiences on the football field, melded perfectly with neuroscience. How did sport participation, specifically post-concussion play, inform the science of brain activity?
Neurochemistry being my area of study, it originally stemmed from one, I loved my chemistry classes, but at the same time, I was looking for a way to apply it. Like, basically, what's the broader relevance of this? And as I think most of us do, I had had experiences with friends and family who were affected by mental health struggles. And I came to understand what is, I guess, known pretty broadly, which is that we have all these chemicals in our brains that ultimately control how we feel, how we behave, how we even perform in the context of athletics. And that was like, it was like getting, I don't remember exactly the day it happened, or it could have been a period of time, but that feeling was like getting like struck by lightning. It was like, okay, I have this interesting chemistry, and this is like a major player in the brain in regard to why we feel how we feel and why we do what we do. So from then on, once I kind of realized that this is what really excited me, I really just aimed to plant myself in as many real world environments where I could kind of study this in real time as possible. So I worked in like clinical psychiatry, and got involved in volunteering with youth, while at the same time still trying to do, I guess, like the more academic grunt work so that I could really understand the mechanisms that underlie what I had been observing in the real world, as opposed to just having the real world side of it.
Roy was studying concussions Monday through Friday and suiting up on Saturdays, to the tune of confused peers and Cornell medical staff. In Roy's mind, though, it made perfect applicable sense.
I think a lot of times it's got questioned, not in like a rude way, but people would just kind of be a little bit confused, honestly, because for one, they'd be like, well, how could you possibly study concussions and still go out there on Saturday afternoons and do this? And to be honest with you, I didn't always have like a great answer to that. It's just football was what I grew up doing and what I love to do. But I think the overarching answer for why I continued and still have continued to follow both paths is I do firmly believe that each side enhances the other. I think there are certain limitations to being, I guess, siloed in a lab environment where, and I've even found this with myself, even as I've followed both paths, when I'm spending more time in the lab, I feel like I kind of fall out of touch with what these things look like and why they matter in the real world. And then I think the opposite is true as well. I think when you're, I guess, boots on the ground, really in it, I think there's just a lot that you pick up that you can ultimately bring to the table as a scientist. Maybe not tangibly, like in the it's not that you're learning techniques or anything, out there on the field, but it sparks, I think, unique questions. And to me, that's in my limited early experience as a scientist, that's what I see a lot of importance in is coming to the table with the right questions and the right curiosity. And for me, all of my questions and all of my curiosities in the scientific space, they come from things that I've either lived as an athlete or have observed in like working with youth in contexts within sports as well. So that's why to me it's of utmost importance to continue to be at least somewhat on both sides because I think they each inspire each other and I'm able to be better on both sides as a consequence of splitting my time. What we know in research and the protocols we follow within like sports medicine and athletic training, they don't align in the way that you might think they would. And there's a lot of reasons for this. And to some extent, you could it's a tricky subject because some of it is unavoidable. Of course, when there's new research, it's not going to be immediately translated into everyday practice. But that's what struck me as maybe not a source of frustration, but a source of inspiration to continue to not only work in research, but ultimately serve as a translator of research for sports audiences and for the general public. Is I was going from lab to locker room and locker room to lab, and I'm like, okay, what I'm learning in my own research and in the research that I'm, hearing from my colleagues and reading and things like that, this just doesn't match what I'm seeing every day as a football player in terms of how we handle these situations. One example I can give for this, just to make it a little bit less abstract, is the research project that I conducted at Cornell. The primary finding was that in the immediate aftermath of the head trauma, the functional patterns of the brain were not significantly different from the control subjects. It almost like if you just looked at these functional patterns, it almost seemed like nothing happened. But a month later, we did see manifestations of trauma and that the functional patterns were somewhat shifted or significantly different from the controls. And we always are very careful in science not to overextend findings. So I have to give the classic caveat, this is not necessarily your classic sports concussion data set. And we're limited in how many subjects we had and all these things. But to me, like the vague overarching message of this is if we are assessing athletes for health, full health, return to play, days or a week after head trauma, we might be missing the changes. There could be changes. We don't typically do like neuroimaging to clear people to return, but these shifts in functional patterns that happen later, they may manifest as shifts in cognition as well. So if we had an athlete take like the classic impact test post concussion, they may score in the normal range a few days after, and then they may see a dip weeks later. And this is all speculation, but it just, I suppose the lesson for myself was, hey, there's something here, and regardless of what this particular finding means, I left that lab or left that project thinking we need more people who are going in between and bringing the science into the context where the science is most needed and can be actionably applied.
Roy's research, published in Elsevier in 2025 and linked in the show notes, posited that, as he said, concussion data collection should be longitudinal in order to see significant changes in neural pathway dynamics. This research, conducted on subjects with mild, moderate, and severe traumatic brain injuries, found a significant difference 12 months post-TBI on attention and reaction times. Network control theory, or NCT, was used to model how damage to white matter connections after TBIs alter patterns of functional brain activity and the subsequent changes to impairment and recovery. As this relates to sport and post-concussion return to play, Roy's research deduced that 51 subjects scanned 1 week, 1 month, 6 months, and a year post-concussion showed dramatically different cognition markers. 1 week post-concussion, few findings differed from the control. 1 month post-TBI, results began to separate. Individuals with mild but predominantly moderate and severe injuries showed a delayed, persistent shift in brain state occupancy and dynamics. Those with more severe injuries, coupled with a longitudinal study, were found to have slower reaction times, and it took more energy to elicit quicker reaction times than the control group. They were, in essence, having to work harder to still react slower. 42 additional subjects with moderate to severe TBIs were also analyzed at 4 to 6 months and a year post-injury. These athletes showed dramatically lower brain activation in the subcortical network and more delayed reaction time at a year than 4 to 6 months or even 1 month post-injury. Roy's findings cast an important disconnect on return to play protocols, but he acknowledges that advancements in contact sport research have leaps and bounds to go.
It's tough to make a call. I think we're seeing a lot of changes in the realm of contact sports and positive changes. So that's why, maybe what I've said so far is a little bit too much gloom and doom, like what we're lacking. But it's really awesome to see the advances that have been made to like the safety of the game of football and other contact sports as well, and also just the preventative strategies. So I want to say that there'd be less sports related head injuries, but at the same time, I guess I'll say I'm cautiously optimistic about this. I think cultural change it always lags a little bit behind scientific innovation. So the task is to find a way to expedite the rate at which the culture and everyday habits follow what we find in the lab.
Specifically, Roy sent out a call to action for researchers to fine-tune subjects. He said that the rate of head trauma and rebound phases post-concussion of youth sport athletes should be studied in much the same way that adults have been.
We see this in the adult brain, but we might see like distinctly the opposite in the adolescent brain. And of course, contact sports are largely taking place in our younger years as well. But yeah, it was a mixture of adults. I can't remember the exact range, but it was like age like 30s, 40s, 50s, I think even up into 60s. So I would be curious. It's sometimes I wish in science you could just click a button and have like more data. It'd be awesome to have that ability to just study whatever question pops into your mind. But that would be something, if that button existed, I'd say, give me the same data from adolescence and I'd want to assess for the same or similar patterns and see if they're present.
Emboldened by the potential for more data, Roy sought out an opportunity to continue his time in the lab. This time at Canada's McGill University, where he used his remaining eligibility to play football while working toward completing a Ph.D. in neuroscience.
My best answer there is that it just felt like a perfect fit for my research interests. I actually didn't even plan to go do a PhD. It's kind of the funny part of this story. My plan was to go straight to medical school, and I knew I was interested in research as well. Given that my long-term path, I plan to work in psychiatry, but leverage neuroscience to improve psychiatric care. So I had taken the MCAT, I had done all the pre-med things, everything you needed to do. I was ready to apply. And then I guess you could just say I caught the research bug and started to kind of look around and started to read about this research taking place in mental health at McGill. And it's very mechanistic. It's very like what is actually happening in the adolescent brain in response to the environment that in turn creates certain behaviors or certain symptoms in adulthood. And at that point, I was deeply ingrained in working with adolescents, and I still am. And this is what I'm interested in doing as a psychiatrist, is adolescent psych. And started to observe certain things and develop all these questions. And here was presented an opportunity to answer these questions by looking like directly at the brain circuitry that underlie the people we become in adulthood. So I was incredibly inspired and excited by that. And I said, you know what, I'm not in any kind of rush with my education. I know in the long term, I want to work in psychiatry, but I think this is an incredible opportunity to expand on the impact I can ultimately make in patient care and just on community access and everything once I'm in psychiatry. So that was the academic answer. Now I have to give you my athlete answer, because I won't lie, like I said before, the drive from the very beginning, it never really left. So at the same time, I was like technically in the transfer portal as an NCAA athlete. I had eligibility left due to injuries, but I had like mentally come to peace with the fact, okay, like I've hung up the cleats basically. But McGill football reached out, and I was like, Canadian football, like that's yeah, like at that point I was like, sign me up basically. And then like I talked to the people on the neuroscience side as well as the coaches, and learned that we could make it work for me to pursue a PhD while I continued to compete in football. And I could not turn that down. It was like too many good things at once. So I was, yeah, like send me whatever papers I need to sign, and I'm there.
Is something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? Regardless of if you have a clinical mental health issue like depression or anxiety, or if you're just a human in this world going through a hard time, therapy can give you the tools to approach your life in a positive way. That's why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and more accessible. This is an important mission because finding a therapist can be really hard, especially when you're limited to the options just in your area. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it's online, it's remote, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to a professional therapist in as little as a few days. It's easy to sign up and get matched with a therapist. If this sounds like something that could help you, there's a link in the show notes to get you started on your therapy journey. It's betterhelp.com/closer mentality. Clicking that link helps support this channel, but it also gets you 10% off your first month of BetterHelp. Because finding a therapist is a little like dating. If you don't really fit with the therapist matched with you, it's easy and free to switch therapists without stressing about insurance, who's in your network, or anything like that. So if you're struggling, consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/closer mentality. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/closer mentality. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this channel. Did you know that you can purchase audiobooks directly from your favorite local bookstore? With Libro FM, you can pick from more than 325,000 audiobooks, including bestsellers and recommendations from real booksellers. You'll get the same audiobooks at the same price as the largest audiobook company out there, you know the name. But you'll be part of a different story, one that supports your local community. If you're new to audiobooks, they're the perfect way to squeeze more reading into your busy life. Listen with the free Libro FM app while you do chores, walk the dog, or relax at home. If you already love audiobooks and don't know what to listen to next, check out recommendations from the people who know best, booksellers. Closer Mentality has partnered with Libro FM on a special offer. Through the link in the show notes, you can get 2 audiobooks on Libro FM for the price of 1. Offer only valid for new members in Canada and the US. Thanks to Libro FM for sponsoring this podcast. A lifelong learner and competitor, Roy never thought that his organized sport experience would extend past football, but he was always open to another chance. That open mind and an Instagram ad for Team USA Bobsled are what allowed a unique transition for his identity as an athlete.
I saw an Instagram ad of all things that was like kind of explaining their sport and the recruitment process. And it said they tested the 40-yard dash, the vertical jump, the broad jump, and the 10-yard dash. And I was like, I have trained for these metrics my whole life. And here's this like other sport, which of course also has like the Olympics is the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow that is just kind of there for the opportunity to, especially since I love to learn. It was so intriguing to me. And I didn't do anything like immediately, though I do recall telling my family about it. I was like, this is my next sport. Like, watch me do this. And so that was prior to going to McGill that I saw that. And at the time, I was contemplating being done playing football. So that's why it really also stuck out as like an opportunity to continue to compete. But like I said before, the football bug caught me again. So I went to McGill and kind of forgot about it for a little bit. But not to bring up another not so happy outcome. I ultimately got to McGill and ended up tearing my Achilles in August. This was last fall. And again, it kind of put me at this spot where I had to contemplate what is next for me. And that the bobsled interest kind of popped up again. And I was just like, you know what? Like, it cannot hurt to give this a shot. So I went out to one of their events, which was in Omaha, Nebraska, ran the 40, did the vertical jump, the broad jump, and all these things, and won the combine. So got the invite to come out to the Olympic training facility and train at a rookie camp. And that went well. It was super fun. So yeah, in some ways, it's like hard for me to believe that this is what I'm competing in now. And everybody asks me, they're like, where did this come from? But yeah, I guess it was just the belief that, like I said before, that my athletic pursuits help a lot with, I guess, my life mission and other areas. And then also just, I won't lie, like it is difficult to give up the athlete mindset or the athlete identity. So when I saw that, from the day I saw that ad all the way till now, I was like, you know, I can make the Olympics. I can do this. I don't know how long it will take, but I know I can do this.
Roy gave credence to his past in football, track, and powerlifting as positive tenets of a successful bobsled athlete. It was like the perfect transition sport.
I can't speak for how it compares to other paths. Like a lot of people that I have met in bobsled came from track and fields and even some from other sports as well. But to me, there's two reasons football was a good lead into this next pursuit. The first is the more tangible, the physical side, I guess you could say, which is like quite literally the numbers that I have become obsessed with for the last, I guess you could say, 10 years, which I was referencing before in terms of the sprints and the jumps, the lifts. It's all the same numbers because the physical quality, which is power and acceleration, it's what they value in football is what they value in bobsled. So my training has not even shifted. I train exactly the same way. And I have learned a lot about how to train to improve these numbers. And that helps a ton, of course, as well. But then the second piece is the, I guess, will to learn. In football, and I think people outside the sport don't necessarily see it this way, but to me, it's so academic. I think you could be like a football major in college. There would be plenty to learn. You could probably get a Ph.D. in football. Like it's that detailed. And bobsled is inherently different because you're not necessarily planning for an opponent, but there are so many little intricacies that must be prepped for, just like how in football, I play defense. So it's very, we've learned the different formations we might see, how we respond when they have motion and all these different things. And bobsled is similar. We have all the different tracks we have to prep for. We have, depending on who you're running with, pushing with, you have to coordinate your timing. And then of course, being a rookie right now, there's just so many like basics that require so much repetition to pick up. Things even as simple as like jumping into the sled as you run down the slope. That I definitely have more than a few clips that look horrendous, but it's the resilience to continue to one, analyze your own performance for mistakes, take the feedback, and go back and do it again and again and continue to iterate through it. And to me, that's from a psychological perspective, that's exactly what I learned to do in football. So it's second nature at this point to despite being on ice, basically just view it the same. Is that it's maybe a longer term path, but I have all these things I have to pick up, and it's showing up every day with that intention to learn as much as I can.
Now 24 years old, Roy sees a future for himself in sport, both in the cleats and in the classroom.
I feel very fortunate that I don't want to say never, but I rarely feel any symptoms of burnout. And I think, and I won't say this is intentional, like I'm some mastermind at avoiding burnout. I think it just like naturally fell into place this way. To me, what's protecting me from that is despite having like long hours with all of these things, they are such different contexts that even if I'm somewhat stressed for most of the day, they're just such different forms of stress. And as a neuroscience nerd, I would love to see like my brain under an fMRI in these different contexts. And the hypothesis I would draw is that it's such different functional patterns taking place in these different contexts that the circuits that are being used in one context as opposed to another, they're recovering while I'm doing the other things. So yeah, maybe I'm sitting at a desk stressed out of my mind about this like dopamine paper that I have to write by tomorrow. But at the same time, the circuits involved in the stressors of being on the field or on the ice are recovering, and then vice versa. So I think it's just the variety that helps me a lot. And I think also the work that I do to help others with these things helps me personally a lot because in talking through burnouts and even what I was talking about earlier with like performance anxiety, I find myself saying things to, and it's teens largely, like high school athletes. I find myself saying things, and then like the Zoom call or whatever it is will end, and I'll be like, you know what? Like I need to, I need to retain that. I need to apply that. So that's maybe an additional piece of avoiding burnout is I do give a lot of thought to like how I'm feeling on a daily basis and try to remain very in touch with, am I able to kind of bring the same fire today that I brought earlier in the week? And if not, I am at a point now where I have progressed at least enough to kind of cut things and take steps back where needed to preserve like my best self. And it took a while to get here, but I guess I value the path, what you learn and who you become en route to achieving these things. And I think even just with bobsled, even that was part of the appeal is it was like, yeah, it sounds like a cool sport. And obviously like the potential to compete in the Olympics is super appealing and who wouldn't be interested by that? But at the same time, it was like, this will do so much for who I can become and ultimately what I can do for the world. Like, I know it's going to be tough. I know it's going to be difficult, but this is going to mold me into someone who can just do a lot more for the people around me or whatever it is that I end up wanting to pursue. So I see it more, the word we would use in science is like global. Like it's not like a super specific outcome. It's not just going to the NFL, going to college. I try to get the kids to see it as you're developing the attributes of an elite performer. And if you're an elite performer, you can do that anywhere. You can step onto a stage and give a talk. You can, whatever career you're interested in, you can be incredibly impactful. It's almost like an X factor, I guess you could say. And that's what differentiates how I perceive, you know, really our collective goals because we're all athletes. But I want people to view it more big picture because, well, for one, sports aren't forever. But also the argument I would make, and I know maybe not everyone would agree with this, but I think sports are also a vessel for impact because there's such widespread interest. So I do a lot to encourage the athletes I work with to see it in this manner because we all have, I think, interests and opinions on how we can make the world around us better and just what we can put out there into the world. And sports is the perfect environment to do so.
Are you an athlete rehabbing from an injury? Are you a coach or athletic trainer seeking additional support for your injured athlete toolkits? KT Tape has exactly what you need. KT Tape is a rehabilitation tape that helps stabilize and compress sensitive areas of the body during exercise. Apply KT Tape to an area either in pain or in recovery and feel the difference. KT Tape is comfortable, stable, and long-wearing. There's tape for all modes of action, from gentle, which is safe for easy activity and everyday use, to pro extreme, for athletes in moderate to high-impact exercise. KT Tape makes water-resistant tape as well for a more adaptable rehabilitation implementation. KT Tape caters to lifelong athletes and focuses on reducing muscle soreness for all users when worn during exercise and up to 48 hours post. Are you an athlete in need of prescription sports goggles or sunglasses? Today's final sponsor may have just the solution for you. A Sight for Sport Eyes was created when founder Shannon Knight saw a niche that was perpetually going unfulfilled. A Sight for Sport Eyes grew out of a need for education surrounding the impact of sport-related eye injuries and their lasting repercussions. A Sight for Sport Eyes runs like a regular optical practice, not an e-commerce store. Their goal is to give you the same high-quality service and name-brand lenses made by the best optical laboratories in the country, geared specifically for athletes and athletic use cases. If you need new lenses or frames, A Sight for Sport Eyes is the perfect place to get them. The links to BetterHelp.com, Libro FM, KT Tape, and A Sight for Sport Eyes are all in the show notes. Now, let's get back to the episode. As another avenue to elicit conversation, Roy founded a mental health tech company called Cortex Flex. This sport performance app and training system seeks to optimize performance by enhancing reaction time, focus, and mental resilience through workouts, mental skills training, and speed drills. This gives Roy actionable data points to inform his research while helping athletes in their primes find greatness.
I just felt like, specifically in sports, but even on the other side of it, because Cortex Flex is, of course, at the intersection of sports and science, that we lack these authentic conversations. We, like I said, we walk around with walls in front of us, and that's, I guess, a metaphor, but it feels like real. It honestly feels like we have walls between us and everybody we interact with. And I saw the ill effects of this in football locker rooms and even with my own situation, and just felt like there has to be something that's out there to help people with these very stressors. And I, at the time, and even now, I would say I know not very much about like business. And, of course, like you do need to know the business side to ultimately scale and succeed in such a mission. So that's probably a tangent for another day, but it's been a battle to learn all of that. But in learning these things and in kind of getting involved, and I guess you could say like the startup ecosystem, I saw a lot of the opposite, like just non-transparency in terms of the mission that people are led by and the ultimately what they're offering, particularly in the space of like youth athlete training. And it was similar, I guess, to what I was saying earlier about bobsled, where I just thought, I don't know how long it will take to build this. And I don't know like how much I'll be able to scale it. I know I have my limitations, but I have to at least do it. I have to try it. Even if it's something that's going to help 10 athletes, it will be worth it. And I think that's like a cliche message to give, but truly, I would go as far as to say in the building process, the amount it's done even for like my personal path and my personal identity, you could erase any amount of impact we've ever created and cancel any future impact, and it would be worth it just for the personal development and I guess the relationships that it's led to and that element of it. So really excited to continue on that in that same vein and ultimately learn enough to truly scale it to something that's going to reach people far and wide. Because I think it goes without saying that these stressors are things that reach people far and wide, and we need some intervention that can allow people to become more resilient to these situations and ultimately find better outcomes.
Thank you so much to Nate for joining Closer Mentality this episode. All pertinent links, including to his research, are in the show notes. You can watch he and I's full interview at the Closer Mentality Uncensored YouTube channel. The link to that is also in the show notes. Thanks for tuning in to episode 126 of Closer Mentality. As always, I'm your host, Julia Mellett. See you next week.